Welcome to the Go Beyond podcast. I'm Charles Scott, your host. On this podcast, I interview exceptional leaders navigating ambition, resilience, and growth. The goal is to help you go beyond your perceived limits. As always, this show is sponsored by the 90% rule, helping leaders escape the grind of the ambitious person's trap and instead spend over 90% of your finite time and energy on things you're good at, you like, and you find meaningful. What's the ambitious person's trap, you ask? That's when you trash your physical health and your emotional health in pursuit of your professional goals. The 90% rule, that's the antidote. Go to executivementorcharlescott.com to learn more. Okay, on today's show, our guest is Dave Finnegan, and Dave is the Chief Connection Officer of BlackFinn Partners, a private equity operating partner firm that helps brands to scale. So, Dave, welcome to the podcast. Happy to have you here.
Thank you, Charles. It's good to be here.
Thank you so much. All right, so before we dive into business, and we're going to talk about business in a second, I always like to start with this question. If you could go back in time and give advice to your 18-year-old self, what advice would you give?
That's a great question. For me, I think I learned so much from my failures, but I was worried about what they did to the perceptions around me, probably more than I needed to be. In other words, diving in, trying new things. I was always, I came from my mom's Scottish, and I have a house full of Scottish aunties visiting me right now. And so I was raised by these really, really strong Scottish women. And so being a hard worker and things like that was something that they gave to me as a gift. And for me, though, as I went through that, when I was working and being a new professional, I didn't know whether I was doing great in the industry. I always felt like I was kind of behind. But then I would
Mhm.
compare notes with others and find out, I'm actually in a pretty good place. And so understanding where you kind of fit and the difference that you can make, I didn't understand that. It took me time over time to understand, okay, yeah, I see how that comes together. And if early on I understood that better, that would have helped a little for my 18-year-old for sure.
Sure. And by the way, the advice you just gave, I think every 18-year-old falls into that trap. And how can you know? So
Sure.
for what it's worth, I hope you're kind to yourself. It's just you need to live and learn to start having that appreciation. So
100%. Making mistakes and things like that, I would not trade those because that's how I learned, to be honest with you, for sure.
no, of course, that's great. I will say there are some people who make mistakes and don't learn. So learning from your mistakes is not a given. So I appreciate that you have to put effort into it as well. So I appreciate that you have the humility to go ahead and learn, right?
It's a really good point because I've come across people who are so ego driven, they justify what happened as something else instead of an internal, how could I have done better? So I think you're right. You know, the enemy of learning is ego, and that's one of the things I learned along the path too, is ego is not a good reason to do stuff.
Fair enough. I love it. And perhaps that was hard work, like a hard won lesson as well, too. So,
Sure. Yeah.
all right, yeah, let's talk. So this is a good segue into business. So tell me about BlackFin Partners. So, how did it start, and what's your vision for this work you're doing today?
So let me give you a little bit of background because it'll help
Sure.
to shape up BlackFin. I helped to start Build-A-Bear workshop years ago.
Mhm. Mhm.
I was over the Store of the Future concept and digital and things like that. I learned a ton about human experience and building experiences that are connected emotionally from Maxine Clark, who was an amazing, amazing leader.
She was the CEO of Build-A-Bear.
She was the CEO and founder of Build-A-Bear. So yes, I learned so much from her. I left there and went to work for Orvis, which is an outdoor fly fishing brand in the Northeast.
Mhm.
And I was the experience officer for Orvis. So technology reported to me, and so did marketing. In both of those instances, professionally, I also was the chairman of the CIO Council for the National Retail Federation when I was at Build-A-Bear. And then when I went to Orvis and started being the marketing officer, I became this CMO chairman of the NRF as well. So Professionally, I was always connected to major networks of good CMOs and good CIOs. And the reason, going back to my early self, I was a new CIO and a young guy trying to figure it out. I could
Mhm.
compare notes with others on a regular basis using a trusted network like a council. You build trusted networks for you know all about this. I did the same on the marketing side. I became a chief marketing officer. I'd never done that before. So I could compare notes with others and ask great brands and the Carhartts of the world and the Michael Kors of the world and compare notes. And that was so, so helpful for me. So
Mhm.
over the years, I learned that human connection mattered a great deal. I
Let me pause you. The NRF stands for National Retail Federation, just for those of you who don't know that.
correct, National Retail Federation. Yeah, it's the biggest retail federation on the planet. And
Yeah.
so in then in 2022, a whole bunch of things fell into place where I took a year to live out of a backpack, traveling the globe. I was what I was doing, Charles, is I was collecting human experiences and interviewing different tribes and things like that. So I interviewed the Maasai tribe about the warrior's path. I interviewed the Yaguas tribe. They're the technology they use blow dart technology in South America. You
Hmm.
know all about them because you spent some time in South America yourself.
Yeah.
I interviewed scientists in the Galapagos and Antarctica. I interviewed the librarian of the oldest library in the world at the Monastery of St. Catherine in in Egypt. Anyway, I came back from that, having lived out of a backpack with a whole different view of what I valued the most. And that kind of set the stage for what I wanted to do next. And I had a friend that approached me about private equity. And so I do private equity with a number of different guys, former Walmart execs, former Publicis execs, where we invest in retail technology. And what I really spend my time doing these days is introducing people. But I don't just open my Rolodex and email them. I came across this study on the side, by the way, I'm getting a master's in anthropology as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I came across this study at Harvard where if you ask someone to do something, they're 30 times more likely to do it if you're face to face compared to if you email them or if you text them.
Well,
And I found that in my own life, right? You're so much more, especially with the wave of emails and all of the stuff that's coming
sure.
to these
Sure.
executives, a real connection matters so much more. And that will continue to grow. And so what I find myself doing these days is making introductions, but I don't do it by just emailing. I create experiences or I get invited to events where I'll bring other people and I'll make introductions that way. So that's where I spend the majority of my time is making introductions to people these days.
It's interesting because you have this on your LinkedIn profile. This is a quote from you. So Dave Finnegan quote, "The greatest way to scale business is to scale relationships." That's exactly your point. Yeah, right. So the
Exactly.
relationships are the foundation of the scale. The other quote that I wrote down, because you've touched on both of these, this is another quote from you. You're passionate about the power of exploration to uncover new ideas. And when you and your wife, did that 2 year, is a full year trip all around the world, right? You were you were absolutely exploring, and you were. I mean, you said you didn't just explore. You weren't just a tourist. You're interviewing people, right? You're proactively seeking out these really interesting, unusual, off the beaten path experiences. And I'm just going to throw his name in here because offline, you and I were talking about Reiner Jens, who's a mutual friend of ours, who founded the Family Travel Association, and he had a big impact on both of us. And he was also passionate about this. And so I think there's this through line in that personal decision to be an explorer and the emphasis on connecting people. Because I think what is life but an exploration? And so when you connect people, you are like an explorer discovering, just like I discovered, your mutual connection with Reiner just because, you came onto this podcast. And so I wonder if the explorer concept translates over to your professional life as well. Can you make that connection too?
Yeah, I have such reverence for Reiner Jens, who inspired me to take that journey you and I talked about.
Yeah.
He was a silent example of the code and what it meant to give back and think about others and think about how to learn and how to get the most out of life. And that example taught me a lot. And so I'll always be grateful for what he represented for me. I belong to a club in New York called the Explorers Club, and one of the presidents of the Explorers Club, I was interviewing him. He's an astronaut. His dad was an astronaut. He's also the godfather of the video game industry. His name is Richard Garriott. He's also the only human that's gone to space, the Mariana Trench, and the North and the South Pole. He's the only explorer that's ever done that. We were talking about why this exact question, and he made an observation that I've adopted into my own life, which is he said what happens is we in industry we get into a echo chamber. We hear the same sorts of things over and over again, the same sorts
Mhm.
of issues, the same sorts of opportunities, the same sorts of things every day. He said when that happens, it's hard to get inspiration or it's hard to get innovation. He said,
Right.
stepping outside your echo chamber, going to the off the beaten track, exploring, going to other industries and seeing how they do things, going to different tribes and seeing how they do things from a human perspective is a source of ways of thinking differently. Though that creates this little engine of innovation that can feed you personally, it can feed your business, it can feed your company. And so that's why exploration is so important, is because it helps us to see things differently and thereby helping to solve problems differently. And when we talked through that, I thought, that is exactly the way I feel about it. That's why exploration is important. It's not a vacation, it's an education, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so for us, looking at opportunities to step out of our echo chambers on a regular basis and see things from another perspective are really helpful. One of the things I learned on this journey that I really, really try to adopt was when you go into experiences and you think you know it all, like if you're North American going to a third world country and you see the poverty or you see the circumstance, some fall into the trap of thinking, well, that's not how it is where I live, or it's not. This is below what I normally experience. That's a trap to fall into. Instead, there's a Zen concept that when you go into new experiences, if you do so with your cup ready to receive, with your
Yeah.
listening, active listening, and
Yeah.
set aside all of your bias, because we all have bias, set it aside and just listen for what can I learn here? What can I
Yeah.
understand here differently? When you approach experiences like that, it opens up a whole new avenue of innovation and inspiration. And so I learned that when I was living out of a backpack, and it was so, so helpful because, going into a temple and watching a Buddhist priest do a ceremony meant that I
Yeah.
could learn differently from that experience if I set aside my own perspective going in. I find that same thing from a business perspective. If I
Mhm.
go into this is what I think is going on with AI right now, by the way, is everyone doesn't have all the answers. It used to be, you had a lot of experience in the industry, you had all the answers of here's how this would work, and this is the recipe for success. AI is shaking that up in a massive way. So none of us really understand or know the complete impact of AI quite yet. What that does is it drops all of our egos and it makes it so that we're
Yes.
approaching this with our cups ready to receive. And if you do that,
Right.
you're going to navigate AI so much better when you're open to listening. And so
I love it.
I find
Yeah.
that applies to business and to exploring around the globe.
I love it. No, no, the concept is the empty cup, right? All experiences are empty, but we fill them with our expectations. We fill them with our judgments, right? So no experience is positive or negative until we decide it's one or the other. It is such a powerful concept, and I like how you linked it to being an explorer, because if you see yourself as an explorer, then explorers explore. They don't know the path. They're not following a path. They're going through a jungle that doesn't have a path.
Yeah.
And that's a very different expectation than to think there's a path I'm supposed to follow. And I took a wrong turn because I was supposed to go somewhere else. But an explorer really can't take a wrong turn because there's no right turn when you're exploring, right? And that's this, I think it's analogous. I love that you brought these two together of an empty cup that's empty until we fill it or we allow it to be filled from the experience. Okay, all right, good. Well, I want to bring this to the question that I teed up the podcast with. I'm just curious about you, as a business leader and an entrepreneur too. Have you fallen into this ambitious person's trap ever? Or are you in it right now? Like where the many executives I've worked with, their physical health or their emotional health gets negatively affected by their professional ambitions. Have you been able to find that, some path that allows you to be successful as measured by however you measure success professionally, and also be able to take care of yourself physically and emotionally? And if so, you want to share the secret. And if not, it's okay to be an object lesson. It's like, guys, don't do what I did. This is how I fell into it. What's your relationship to the ambitious person's trap?
Well, the I think it's spot on. I think your finger's on the right issue for most of us, especially those that are ambitious and want to go make it an impact. When I was at Build-A-Bear, I was on the innovation board at Orvis, and I had this guy who was over he was Under Armour's digital guy, and he was kind of one of those spiritual guru types that I really, really admired. He said, Finn, I have a book that I think you would like. It was called Halftime. And so he gave me a copy of this book. And essentially, the whole idea, the whole thesis of the book is that in the first half of our life, we are in collector mode. And we collect things, certainly, but we also collect people and relationships and kids and education and career and sweaters and cars and houses. And so that's the first half of your life. And then you hit this spot. Some people never hit this spot, by the way, but many hit this spot where they have relationships, they have those pieces in place, and more sweaters and more shoes don't make you more happy. So you get to this spot where your game plan changes, and your game plan changes in a significant way so that now what you care about is making an impact on the work that you do. Like you
Hmm.
don't care, you don't have to be the boss. You just want to make the impact, right? You want to give back to others, right, in a really meaningful way. And then the third is that you collect experiences and relationships that matter to you.
Yeah.
And I read that and I was like, oh my gosh, that is exactly how I feel on my journey. I feel like I'm right at this halftime moment where I'm not a trust fund kid. I was raised by, miners from mining family backgrounds from Montana and Scotland. But I also don't need to make a bazillion dollars to be happy. I really
Right.
balancing that was going to be really, really important for me. And so I started thinking in those terms more about collecting experiences. That's why I went on the journey around the planet. One of the reasons is to
Yeah.
collect experiences. And I found that that has helped me to avoid that trap a lot because it shifted my perspective in a pretty major way around what I valued the most. And so now I practice what I call a portfolio of life, where I do a balance approach of I go to school, I'm getting a master's in anthropology, one class a semester for the rest of my life. I like to joke with people. Um,
It'll take a while.
yeah, which is the point. It's
Right.
this lifelong learner, right? So I'm cool with taking a class a semester. It's awesome. And I do that. I do private equity work. I do event stuff with people where I introduce people all the time. And all of that stuff, for me, helps me to balance what you just described and really
Yeah.
focus on what matters the most, which is making an impact, connecting people, connecting relationships, and experience and collecting experiences. And so that's where I'm focused these days.
Wow, it's what an insightful way to look at it. So, and if I can summarize when I hear you talk, So the ambitious person's trap is always a trap, especially in the first half of life, as we're collecting the things, as you say. But then the definition of wealth almost seems to change. And the way I hear you define wealth is a wealth of experiences, a wealth of healthy relationships, right? And a wealth of investment in yourself. That's not material necessarily. I'm sure money can be a piece of it, but it's certainly not the full, the large percentage of it, the way you talk. What a wonderful, redefinition of wealth from the typical way that people would define it. And I like that you think about it as a portfolio too. So there's investments, and you're diversifying your investments in yourself and in your life as well. So, wow, but very, very interesting. So, no, okay, well, so let me summarize here. I could talk for a long time. I told Dave at the beginning, I was like, we try to keep these compact. This is for people like on their commute or just want a quick, quick bite of insight. But you guys can tell we could spend hours at this, but I'll wrap it up here. So thank you very much. Is there any way, if people want to follow your work or get in touch with you, do you want to send them to a website? Or what would be the way to contact you or follow what you're doing?
I use LinkedIn on a regular basis, and so that's the best way to get a hold of me, Dave Finnegan, on LinkedIn. That I use that on a regular basis, so I would welcome connecting with others.
Perfect. Yeah, you practice what you preach, right? So it's about connection. So reach out, people. You got a good guy to talk with. So, all right, well, Dave, thank you very much for being on the show. I appreciate it. So, as a reminder to everyone listening, this show is sponsored by the 90% rule, helping leaders escape the grind of the ambitious person's trap and instead spend over 90% of your finite time on things you're good at, you like, and you find meaningful. To learn more, go to executivementorcharlescott.com. And until next episode, go beyond your perceived limits and live the 90% life.